Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, where today we will be taking a look at the Western Alliance Era 2 Premium Tank Destroyer, the ELC EVEN NA2 SS-12. I'm just going to call this the ELC for the rest of this video because that name is way too long to say every single time. The ELC is the latest release in Wargaming's new line of toxic tanks. It is a one-man army, it's 3 meters shy of a proxy spot, with a concealment value of 35 meters with the right crew and equipment. It's got 280 GMs per clip. There's another premium tank destroyer in the game that was bad enough with just one in the clip, but nope, this one's got 2. And it's got a fully traversable turret, which the other premium tank destroyer small thing that didn't have that, and it was still good, but this is fully traversable. This thing is fast enough to keep itself safe. It's small, it's difficult to see, and you can earn it for free with the current snowball currency. This thing, while being just as toxic as the other toxic tanks that are in the game, I've got to say it's a great tank. And is it worth getting for free? Absolutely. Is it worth getting even if you were to pay the full gold price? Yes, it is. It's going to be 12,500 gold outside of the snowball event, the Christmas, what is it, Winterfest 2024 season. You can get it with snowballs. I think it's 30,000 snowballs in that event. But if this is outside of that event, 12,500 gold with no discount on it whatsoever. That is expensive, but this tank is just it's a one-man army, and you know, yeah, I don't need to say any more about it really. Alright, with that said, let's take a look at some of the stats, and I'm going to break tradition, and we're going to compare this to its only competitor in Era 2, the Weasel 1 light tank. So yes, I'm going to be comparing a tank destroyer to a light tank. The ELC has 690mm of pen on its 80 GMs, each of which will do an average of 1,300 alpha. The Weasel 1 has 175mm of pen on standard rounds, 35mm on secondary. Standard will do an average of 25 alpha, and secondary will do an average of 30 alpha. The clip potential of the Weasel 1 is 2,500 damage in 6 seconds, and the clip potential of the ELC is 2,600 damage in 12 seconds. So it's twice the time, just a little bit more alpha, a little bit more damage output for the ELC. The ELC has 2,300 hit points, the Weasel 1 has 2,200 hit points. ELC, unboosted, has a top speed of 70 kilometers an hour. The Weasel has an unboosted top speed of 75 kilometers an hour. View range for the ELC comes in at 520 meters. Weasel 1 has a view range of 570 meters. And finally, the ELC has a moving and still concealment value of 348 meters and 247 meters, while the Weasel 1 has 263 meters respectively. Now you might be wondering, why have I chosen to compare a light tank to a tank destroyer? Well, it all comes down to the equipment and crew skills, which I'll put my equipment and crew skills on the screen now. The ELC can take advantage of crew skills that the Weasel can't, i.e. silent driving. Fully kitted out, this means that the ELC has a concealment value, like we've already said, of 35 meters, while the Weasel, it's stuck at 132 meters or something like that. I don't own the Weasel, so I can't actually check this myself. I think it's 119s in my head as well, but then I've also got 132. Either way, it's roughly 100 meters worse than the ELC, and that is a huge advantage for the ELC. You will outspot the Weasel. So the toxic light tank in Era 2 is going to be outspotted now by this toxic tank destroyer. And as I mentioned earlier, the Weasel is the ELC's only worthy opponent. In a 1 versus 1 fight, the Weasel 1 it's got a slight advantage, but the evasion tactic for the ELC is to just outdrive the Weasel. If the Weasel player hasn't equipped the engine and tracks equipment, but if you and you equip the ELC like I have, the ELC is actually faster than the Weasel, and you can outplay the Weasel. And the reason I say that is because even if the Weasel is right behind, like when I say right behind you, you know, within 100 meters, you will have the Weasel spotted, which means you know where it is, but the Weasel won't have you spotted. So it can't use the strategy for Weasel players seems to be just RBRT everything. If you're not spotted, RBRT doesn't work. And auto-lock, auto-lock doesn't work is what that means. And you can, because this thing is so small and you're not detected, you just have to outdrive the Weasel. Find cover, find buildings, find bushes, and just duck right, duck left every now and then, and you'll lose them. I have had Weasels, and not even that, I've had Weasels following close behind me, and they're relatively low health, and, you know, they've not fired a single shot at me because I'm not spotted, and because they're on 300, 400 hit points, I've spun my ATGM launcher, I suppose is what you call it, not gun. Spin the launcher around and just hit them with an ATGM that does 300 damage anyway, and you can kill them anyway. The ELC is not even limited. Well, it is limited to an extent, but it's not really that limited by the 100 meter arming distance. It does in some circumstances, but this thing is so small, so nimble, so well concealed that it has control. And this is an example of what I mean. Bang. Weasel. Done. Weasel. Gone. I spotted him first. He didn't know where I was. I got close enough. And he's done. ATGM makes contact and he's dead. This ELC, the technique for surviving in this, even with the autocannons in the game, and I've seen some people commenting saying, oh, you know, the autocannons will take care of it. Yes, that is true to an extent. There are multiple Weasels in this game. There's an AMX in this game. There are multiple autocannons in this game right here. And yes, while they can be a threat, they are not as powerful as you might think they are, because the concealment of this thing is so good. Autocannons rely heavily on... I hate to say it, but they rely heavily on auto-lock. And if you're not spotted, that doesn't work, which means you've got to manually aim your autocannon. And that's not easy. That is not easy to do. So the survival strategy for the ELC is to just drive evasive, wait for, you know, if it's a Weasel chasing you, wait for them to reload and just pump 2 ATGMs into them. Even if you're only doing 600 damage, you can still drive evasive. You can still escape. You're still in control of the engagement. And it's not going to happen every time, but the ELC can handle Weasels, which is quite impressive given how toxic the Weasel is. Now, I do need to address the elephant in the room. I am comparing the newest toxic tank to one of the other toxic tanks. Other premiums and tech tree tanks in Era 2 are now not contenders in a fight. Era 2 is essentially a Weasel versus ELC era now, and that is the main fight. That's where the main competition is going to be. And that's what I'm finding, is that's where the main, the real competition is. What you need to do, though, is you've got to mop up all of the other tech tree tanks. You've got to just deal with all the other tanks that just get in the way, so that you can then get to, the main event, which is Weasels versus ELCs, or anything with an autocannon versus an ELC. And I mean, personally, I don't think that's a very good thing for the game. If there is no Weasel in Era 2, if there's no Weasel in an Era 2 game, then the ELC is dominant. It is number one on the scoreboard. It's going to be, because this thing is so good at what it does. It doesn't matter what map. It could be Mountain Pass. It could be Al Alamein. This tank is a one-man army. It will carry, and it doesn't have the limitations that the Weasel does, for example. So the ELC has 26 ATGMs, and it takes you 30 seconds to reload too. So it's going to take a long time to get through all those ATGMs. And anyone that's played the Weasel very, very competitively and have done very well in it, you've probably run out of ammunition because all you've got is 700 rounds. So the limiting factor for the Weasel and its dominant streak is you run out of ammunition and you can't do anything. The ELC can do exactly the same thing the Weasel can, but it doesn't run out of ammunition. And it's got better concealment. And it doesn't have the limitation of the Weasel TOW in Era 3 of having certain degrees left and right on the turret. This thing is 360. The Weasel is toxic, and you can't rely on it to carry a game, but it's still toxic. So that's the sort of that's where we were for the toxicity. But now the ELC has come in and it's even removed the limitations that the Weasel had. The ELC is toxic and it can be relied on to carry games. And the game you're seeing right now is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I am in full control of this fight. I've chosen to play long range at this point, and the AMX does not control the range. Doesn't control that. I'm in control of where we fight. I'm in control of whether or not it's a long range engagement or whether it's a short range engagement. I'm in control of every aspect of this fight. There is nothing that AMX can do without me allowing it to happen. And that, for me, is why this tank is toxic, because it has everything going for it. 360 turret, it's small, it's well concealed, it's got a clip that can hit extremely hard, and it can just disappear into thin air, and you'll never know where it's coming from next. You'll never see it. And the only time you will see it is when the player of the ELC decides to give their position away, like I did there, by firing an ATGM. You know, that was all up to me. I didn't have to pull the trigger there. He didn't know where I was. I controlled that whole engagement, and there are no threats to an ELC. Weasel maybe is a threat. Yeah, Weasel, or just being completely out, you know, screwing up and getting yourself into a 1 versus 5 close range fight. Yeah, that's a threat. But if you're careful about the engagements, there are no threats to the ELC. There are only targets for the ELC. Everything is easy prey. And that's that to me is not good. I don't think that is what we need in this game. But that's up to Wargaming. I've given you my thoughts on this thing. It's a very, very good tank. And, well, I think getting one of these is... I don't think it's going to be good for the game, but for you as a player, yeah, you're going to be getting a very, very good premium tank for free. Alright, before we close this out, there's the final kill. Let's just go over the economy stats. So it's a 60% silver boost, 15% tank XP boost, 4% free XP boost, and a 10% crew XP boost. Not sure why we've got a 60% silver boost, but there we go. So, end of the game. Almost 17,000 damage and 8 kills. And something I haven't mentioned at this point is this was the second game I played in this tank. Second game. Yeah. It's a stupidly good tank, and I got myself my second Kolobanovs. This tank is incredibly good. It's insanely good, but it is also insanely toxic. It's free. You should get one, but I don't think this is what the game needs in any way, shape, or form. Okay, folks. That's all I've got for this one. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. If not, a dislike. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll catch you in the next one.